Hey, good evening, everybody. Welcome. Hey, it's Wednesday. You made it to Wednesday night. Man, I hope your week has been going really well. Welcome to our midweek Bible study. I'm Doug Chappelle. I'm the pastor at Thelma Baptist Church, and I'm so glad that you have made a choice tonight to stop what you're doing and just kind of sit down and join me here on Facebook Live. We've been getting together every Wednesday now for a while since all this whole pandemic thing started. And so we're not meeting in person, but we're meeting, virtually. But we're having great participation every week, and so I really appreciate you being with us tonight. We've been having a good time doing some Bible study and talking about a few things. Listen, let me just say this to you as we get started tonight. My hope and my prayer is that life is good for you right now, that God's blessing and you see His blessing, that God's working and you know He's working in your life. Because He does. He loves you. He's with your family, and He wants what's best for you. His plan, He's got a plan. We don't always see it, and we don't always know it, but He's got a plan. And God is at work even in the crazy time of 2020. You know what? We got a global pandemic. We got all kind of stuff going on with the election stuff this year, and all kind of crazy things. But God's in control of all that. This week, students went back to school, and I know that's kind of mixed feelings about all of that, but here in Elmore County, our kids are in the classrooms and going through all the social distancing protocols, and you know what? I've had that on my mind this week. Been praying for teachers, for students, for people that are coaching teams, people playing sports, playing in the band. There's a lot to that, and so I'm praying that everything just continues to be blessed by the Lord. And listen, I hope that, we're beginning to see the light at the end of the tunnel here with all this pandemic stuff. In the last couple of weeks, we've had some really good things go on at church. And that we've had great worship. If you've been there in person, you know this. We've had a great time of worship with Brother Bill leading us with his vocal praise team and his instrumentalist. Boy, both services have been having good participation. We've had great services going on, great times of worship. And we've also had great participation, via our own live stream, whether you watch it on Facebook Live or our YouTube channel. A lot of folks that are participating via those means. And so we really appreciate everybody doing that. But something that you might not expect during a pandemic time, whenever churches are, kind of meeting, in different ways and doing things a different way, sometimes you don't expect, there are people joining the church. But you know what? The last couple of weeks, we have had a couple of families join our church, and I'm going to introduce you to them tonight. Now, you probably already know these folks, but I'm going to introduce them anyway. Here you go. Take a look at these young people here. We got the Hardens, Miss Gloria, Mr. Eugene Harden. You know what? They've been around our church for a long time. A lot of you guys know them and love them already. And if you don't know them, you need to meet the Hardens, all right? Because they're super fantastic people. They're really nice. Mr. Eugene's a wonderful sax player. He's a great musician. And if you ever get lucky enough that Miss Gloria invites you to her house to eat, you better take the invitation because she's a fantastic cook. So they joined a couple weeks ago. And then last week we had the Tennells, Stephen and Rhonda Tennell. They became part of our church, and we're pretty excited about that. They came by letter from a sister church in our area. And again, if you don't know these folks, you need to meet them. They're pretty awesome people. And so we welcome those folks to our church, and we're excited every time God brings an increase to our fellowship. Boy, we just give Him glory, and we just look forward to spending more and more time with folks that are such an important part of our church. We are meeting on Sundays for corporate worship right now. We have 2 services, 2 opportunities for you to meet in person, an 8:30 service and a 10 a.m. service. And so if you want to join us in person, you can be there in the auditorium. We're doing all the social distance stuff. We got people meeting at the door, handling all the handles and doorknobs, and making all the contact that needs to be made for you so you can come in, find your seat. Everything's marked out so you can social distance. And we are asking everybody, since we're under a mask ordinance in our state, to wear a mask as you come in the door. And that's mostly because, our doorways can be kind of narrow, and we can get really close with people as we go in. And then once you get inside and you get social distanced and the service has begun, then you can take that mask off and enjoy the worship service and then put it back on when you leave at the end. We really appreciate you, your faithfulness doing that. I know that's not everybody's favorite thing to do. It's not mine either, but But it's just where we are, and so we appreciate you helping with that. We do have childcare available. If you have a child that falls in the age range of 2 months to pre-K, there is an opportunity for you to have childcare for those kids. And anybody older than that, hey, bring them into the worship service, and we'll just get together as families and we'll worship. It'll be great, right? So if you're looking for our online giving, there's the link here on the screen. It's tlifeonline.com/give, and so you can give. It's safe, secure. You can also give when you come to the in-person worship service. There are receptacles at each one of the doorways as you come in or as you go out, and it's clearly marked offering. You can mail it in, drop it by during the week, whatever is good for you. It's great for us too, so we appreciate your faithfulness and giving there. Also, don't forget that if you're still not comfortable with coming into the room and being up close and personal with folks just yet, hey, listen, we understand that. No judgment. That's great. What we've done is we've made it possible for you to join us, well, on Sundays at 10 a.m. via live stream, just like you're doing now. We live stream on Facebook Live, and we also live stream on our YouTube channel. Just go to YouTube, look up Thelma Baptist Church. I don't think there's another one. And you'll find our channel, and you can see our service live at 10 o'clock on Sunday morning, right? And so we really appreciate folks that are doing that as well. I know it's not the same, but hey, it works during a global pandemic, right? Hey, I got some good news for you. We got something coming up that I'm pretty excited about. Because some of you probably been wondering when we are going to take the next step in our regathering. You know, when we started back on June the 7th for worship, we called it a regathering day, and that's when we started having those two corporate worship services, and that's all we're doing as far as on-campus stuff right now. I know some group life groups are meeting, some on campus now, and some not on campus, some via Zoom, all kind of different ways. But all along the way now, for a while, we've been praying about when we might begin some, formal on-campus group life for Sunday school. And we have a kind of a plan in mind. We believe God's leading us to this to start. Of course, we are daily monitoring everything that's going on with the virus. And of course, anything I tell you at this point, well, it's all subject to change, unfortunately, if something does happen. But if the Lord provides and nothing happens, then we are looking at, we went from regathering to reconnecting now. You know, group life for us is an incredible way for people to maintain connection to the church, because you get to know people in a small group environment. It's kind of like a family. You get to have shared life experiences and do life together, right? And so we're looking at reconnecting, and we're shooting for September the 13th. That is the Sunday after Labor Day. And we're going to shoot to have on-campus group life gatherings. Now, if you're meeting off campus now and that's working for you, you don't have to come back on campus. People can still have group life off campus if you prefer. Or you may still not be ready. You may not feel comfortable coming back in person, all right? So, again, there's no pressure ever for us. But for those of you that are comfortable, we're going to do everything we can. In fact, we're going to spread out some. Your groups will look different. And we're going to be having group life available during three different hours on Sunday morning. Some groups will meet at 8:30 while we're having our 8:30 worship. Some groups may meet at 10 a.m. during our 10 o'clock worship. And then some will meet after our 10 o'clock worship at 11. So that's three different opportunities, which means that we have triple the classroom space we've had before. And we can spread out, and some groups who may be a little larger can maybe split up into two different groups or meet at different times, or one teacher might teach in two of those different hours. We're going to do whatever we have to do, because it's really important for us to be together. You know what? It's really special, the connection we have as a church family at Thelma Baptist Church, and we just don't want to see that weaken or fade away. We want to just stoke the fire and keep that strong. And so you be praying with us, if you will. Pray about September 13th. Maybe that's the day that God's got for us to get back to being in that small group environment, all right? So I really appreciate you praying with us about that. And again, we're going to continue to pray, and we're going to be watching the situation with the virus and the threat, and we'll be, paying attention to whatever warnings are out there, and we'll just let you know, well, as we know, right? So there you go. That's what's going on there. And as always, if you want to send me any questions you have, or if there's any way I can pray for you, there's my email address on the screen. It's doug@tlifeonline.com. I'll be happy to answer your questions or pray with you about any prayer needs, or I'll just be interested if you want to let me know what's going on in your life. That'd be awesome. Drop me a line. That'd be really good. All right. And so now we kind of are about halfway through our Bible study in the Gospel of Mark. That's pretty exciting. We've been doing a book study, which is what we've been in the habit of doing for a while now, in our Wednesday night gatherings, even when we were doing it in person. And we just choose a book of the Bible and say, all right, we're just going to sit at the big buffet and just eat until we can't eat anymore. We're just going to go all the way through a book, verse by verse, account by account, event by event. And we're going to see what God will show us as we go through this book together. And so we are about halfway through the Gospel of Mark. That's where we are. And so I want to encourage you to go ahead and grab your Bibles and get ready for that. Tonight we're going to be in Mark chapter 8. So you can go ahead and start turning there. And we're going to start reading together in Mark chapter 8, verse 22. All right? So I hear those pages a flapping. You're getting ready, right? That's good. I like that. All right. Hey, let's take a look and see what it says tonight. This is Mark chapter 8, beginning in verse 22. Here's what the Bible says. It says, "And they came to Bethsaida, and some people brought to him a blind man and begged him to touch him. And he took the blind man by the hand and led him out of the village. And when he had spit on his eyes and laid his hands on him, he asked him, 'Do you see anything?' And he looked up and said, I see men, but they look like trees walking. Then Jesus laid his hands on his eyes again, and he opened his eyes. His sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly. And he sent him to his home, saying, 'Do not even enter the village.'" Now, this is, a pretty interesting story, right? Now, if you've been with me in our step-by-step walk through the Gospel of Mark, well, you already know that this isn't the first healing account that we have taken a look at. We've actually seen quite a bit of that. And this isn't, the first move that Jesus has made in his public ministry. In fact, we've been following that since, late chapter 1. And so he's been moving from place to place. And even tonight, in our text, it says that they came to Bethsaida, right? And so they're in Bethsaida, and that's a little town that's several miles north of the Sea of Galilee. So he's away from home base where they started out and where they spent probably most of their time ministering, but they've ventured out a couple of times, and so they're several miles north there of the Sea of Galilee. And then what the text tells us tonight is this. It says, "And some people brought to him a blind man and begged him to touch him," right? Now, when you think about this phrase, that some people brought to him a blind man, you got concerned people who came and begged Jesus to touch him. Now, that's commendable, right? It kind of reminds me of those 4 men who brought their friend who was a paralytic to Jesus early on in our study. In fact, we've seen on a couple of occasions, Jesus is kind of working his way around, healing all the different body parts. He's healed the paralytic, the guy whose legs wouldn't work. He's healed, the guy who was a leper, who had basically a skin issue that affected a lot of his body. He's healed, just recently we studied where he healed somebody who was deaf and mute in kind of a similar fashion to what he's doing now in this scenario with the blind man. There was the man in the synagogue with the withered hand. And so, he's healed a lot of physical afflictions at this point. And so now we get to a place where these people bring this blind man to Jesus, and, they beg Jesus to touch him. Now, there's a couple of distinctions in this particular account of healing that are just a little bit different, than some of the things that we've seen in earlier healing scenarios. First of all, when they brought the blind man to Jesus, and then they, begged him to touch him, well, the text says that Jesus took the blind man by the hand and led him out of the village. And so Jesus going into the village in Bethsaida, and then these folks bring the blind man to Jesus. Jesus, well, the first thing he does he grabs the man by the hand and leads him out of the village. That's kind of an interesting twist here. And it's not uncommon for Jesus when he's dealing with somebody, especially if what he's about to do for them or in them or something he's going to tell them, if he's meaning that to be particularly for them. In other words, there are some miracles that Jesus worked so the crowd would see, so the disciples would see, to make a point that he was trying to teach. But then there are other times whenever he would pull somebody aside and just speak right to them and deal right with their particular problem. And that's what he's doing here with this particular fellow. He did that before with the one who was mute and deaf. Remember in Mark 7:33, it says, "And taking him aside from the crowd privately, he put his fingers into his ears and after spitting touched his tongue." And so back then, even with the mute and the deaf person, that he actually pulled him aside from the crowd, took him to a private place, and dealt with the issue that he had. So, that's a really interesting thing, first of all, but it's also kind of an encouraging thing. Because, first of all, it tells us that there's always rhyme and reason to what Jesus does. In other words, there's nothing frivolous that Jesus does, but everything he does is on purpose. Every step he takes, every journey he takes, every word he speaks, every touch with someone in the crowd, every miracle he works, every demon cast out, there is rhyme and reason to what Jesus does. And there are times when Jesus will do something that's essentially a demonstration of something he's trying to teach, so everybody around can see it and learn from it. And God can get glory from that. But also, there are times that he just says, "Doug, I need to pull you aside. I need to talk with you privately. I need to deal with the issue that you have. This is only for you. I'm going to take care of this." And I really think that's a pretty neat thing, right? And so, Jesus grabs the hand of this one who is blind and takes him out of the village, and he does that. He pulls him aside, first of all, at the beginning of the story. He grabs him by the hand and takes him out of the village. And then at the end of the story, it closes with, "And he strictly charged him not to enter back into the village." And again, this isn't new. This isn't the first time that he has charged someone not to tell anybody or not to go show anybody. And so Jesus, again, always has a reason for doing that. And the reason in this case, I think, is fairly easy to surmise, and that is that we're getting really close to Jesus moving forward into, what his destiny is, where he's going to be heading toward Passover celebration, moving toward that time he's going to be arrested and going to be crucified, and that time is getting closer and closer. And, Jesus also sets a great example for us to always keep focused on what the mission is. And his mission is, he came to save people from sin. And so healing, it was not his primary mission, but boy, he did that all along the way. And that's a pretty neat thing, right? And so that's kind of interesting that Jesus, in his healing of the blind man, pulled him aside privately outside the village and then told him not to go in the village once he was healed. Another thing that is of particular interest here is that this miracle takes place in two phases, right? Did you notice that when we read the story? Remember, the scripture tells us here that at first Jesus spat in the guy's eyes and laid his hands on him, right? So that part's very similar to how he dealt with the one who was deaf and mute. It was a physical touch. It was an act of spitting, involved in that. And so there's a similarity there. But here's the thing that's distinctive about this is that when Jesus spat in his eyes and when Jesus touched him, then he asked the question, "Hey, do you see anything?" That's a really important clue for us as to how on purpose this is, all right? Because Jesus doesn't need to ask the question, right? Because, he's God in the flesh. He already knows. And so he asks the question, "Do you see anything?" And then the guy responds, "I see people, but they look like trees walking," right? which is a pretty fascinating description that Mark gives us in this gospel. And so then what happens is, the Bible tells us, then Jesus laid his hands on his eyes again, and he opened his eyes, and his sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly, right? So you got this two-step healing, spat in the eye, touched the man. Hey, can you see anything? I'm seeing some people, but they look like trees walking. Oh, and then he puts his hands on his eyes again, and he opens his eyes, and his sight was restored, and he saw clearly. So here's a question for you. Why? This is unique, right? Everybody else, he touched the leper and he was made clean. He just touched the guy with the withered hand in the synagogue, healed. There are people that Jesus healed without even being in their presence. So why is it in this particular case that it appears, just if you just take the words at their surface meaning, right? It appears that Jesus attempted to heal this guy and it didn't work, at least not completely. Well, I hope that you know that that's not the case, all right? This is not a fail on Jesus' part, and this is not anything that didn't work, but there's purpose behind it because Jesus doesn't do something without purpose, right? And so when Jesus did this in two phases, it represents something, and you're going to understand it better when we get to the next section here, all right? This two-phase clarity of sight really speaks to what happens next in the Gospel of Mark. And so before I explain it fully, let me just kind of take you into that, all right? This is Mark chapter 8, beginning in verse 27. We're moving ahead now from where Jesus healed the blind man. Well, let's take a look at this. In Mark 8, verse 27, it says, "And Jesus went on with his disciples to the villages of Caesarea Philippi. And on the way he asked his disciples, 'Who do you say that I am?' And they told him, 'John the Baptist.' Others say, 'Elijah.' And others, 'One of the prophets.' And he asked them, 'But who do you say that I am?' And Peter answered him, 'You are the Christ.' And he strictly charged them to tell no one about him." Hey, there's some familiarity, right? There's something familiar about this. First of all, it's not uncommon that Jesus would address the needs of other people, speak to crowds, speak to individuals who aren't one of the 12, and then later to have a private lesson with the disciples. We've already seen that several times take place in our study. It's kind of a common thing, right? And when you first read this part of Mark, you might think, how in the world is that related to what happened with that blind guy in Bethsaida? How is that representative of what happened with the disciples, or vice versa? How's the relationship there? Well, let's think about this, all right? First, Jesus was in Bethsaida, which is a few miles north of Galilee. Well, now the Bible says in our text that he went on with his disciples to the village of Caesarea Philippi, which is about 25 miles north of Bethsaida. So he's moving out further, moving on, and then he asks the question of the disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" And so when he asks this question, what the disciples do is, well, they do just what you and I do. And they give an answer based on, well, what I can glean from what I've heard and what I see. Jesus is asking, what are you hearing? What's the buzz? What are people saying about me? And so what they did was they repeated to Jesus what they'd heard, right? Because some people said that he was John the Baptist, right? Specifically, the one who actually said that was Herod. Whenever Herod was about to, Herod's the one who had John the Baptist beheaded, put to death. And then later on, when Jesus' public ministry was going full blast, Herod was the one that was going, or thinking about what Jesus was doing, all these miracles and this this obvious he's from God thing going on. And he was thinking, well, John the Baptist has come back. I had that guy put to death. He's come back. And so the disciples, they repeated what Herod said. Hey, that's John the Baptist come back. And then they also repeated what other people had said. There were others that were saying that Jesus was Elijah reincarnated or come back to life, or some other prophet from times of old. And so the disciples repeated what everybody else was saying. And then Jesus gets, a little more pointed in dealing with the disciples and asks them directly, all right, so who do you say that I am? See, if you remember, as we've studied through this, if you've been with me for even the last few weeks, you probably have noticed that the disciples have been a tad slow in picking up on things, right? They've been a tad slow in kind of putting all the pieces together. Just even as much as last week we talked about, how Jesus fed another multitude, 4,000, did so with 7 loaves of bread. They took up 7 baskets. And then what happened? Whenever Jesus and the disciples got in the boat to leave, they got out and realized, we don't have any bread. And they still weren't connecting, what they were dealing with on a day-by-day basis, how they were talking among themselves, how they were seeing life and dealing with life. They still weren't seeing and putting together everything about Jesus and who he really was. And so, again, there is a reason that Jesus asked this question. And the reason is because Jesus, he really wants these disciples to understand who he is. And the reason for that is, and you'll find out next week when we start our next part of the study, is things are going to really start taking a turn toward the cross. And so Jesus is going to have to take his attention off of spending so much time preparing and teaching the disciples, because he's going to be busy with some other really important things. And so he wants the disciples to grasp firmly his true identity before he reveals to them the necessity of his coming death and his resurrection. And so there's a parallel between this account where Jesus asks these questions of the disciples. Remember, he asked them, who do people say that I am? Well, some people say you're Elijah. Some people say that you're John the Baptist reincarnated. Some people say you're a prophet. Okay, who do you say that I am? And this is where Peter, as a spokesperson for the disciples, says, well, you are the Christ. And so there's this little aha moment after all these times where they didn't seem to put everything together, that Peter speaks up and says it plainly and succinctly and says, you are the Christ. Ding, ding, ding. That's good. But do you see the parallel between the healing of the blind man and what happened with this little interview Jesus does with the disciples? Listen, think about it. Jesus pulls aside the blind man, spat in his eyes, touched his body, and said, hey, can you see? Oh, I can see a little bit. I can see people, they look like trees, though, walking. Oh, well, touched again. And then he begins to see clearly. And the parallel is that as the disciples have spent all this time with Jesus, as they've borne witness to his miracles, as they've listened to his teaching, as they have gotten private tutoring with all his explanations, they were starting to see something. At first, not entirely clearly, even though Jesus was miraculously multiplying food and having leftovers more than enough for them, they were still having conversations about what are we going to do about bread. They weren't getting there quite, seeing, just like that blind man, seeing some shapes, I'm seeing some people, but they still look like trees walking. But then there's this boom, revelation moment. Peter says, you are the Christ. And so now we've kind of gotten to this place where, just like that blind man got to a place where he could see clearly, the disciples, they're beginning to see clearly what's going on and who Jesus is and what is about to happen. So it's a pretty neat thing, right? And so, there's this big moment here that I think is really important. And then Jesus does with them what he's done with, the guy who was blind and, most everybody else he's healed. The Bible says that he charged them to go and tell no one, right? He strictly charged them to tell no one about him. And again, this is not because Jesus is trying to get people to hide anything. All right? There's a reason that Jesus told people not to go and tell everybody, and that was mostly crowd control. Because there was a bigger plan in play that, well, nobody knew about. And the plan wasn't to be a healing show or a casting out demon show or to be an overthrowing the evil government show to take over in some way. People were expecting a political champion. People were expecting a warrior, kind of Messiah. And Jesus was coming to pay attention to something that was much more important than those things, to rescue people from lostness and sin. And so whenever there was any kind of indication that things might get out of hand on the people's side of things, and they might get diverted into something that's not really relevant to what God's trying to do here through Jesus' work, then that's when Jesus would say, look, I don't want you to tell anybody. I mean, he told the blind guy, right, not to go into the village. Why? Well, because it wouldn't matter what the blind guy said or didn't say. Everybody knew him. And so as soon as he showed up, being able to see, they'd know, right? So don't go back in the village, right? So now Jesus has seen the disciples get to the place that he's been wanting them to get to. They finally know, hey, Jesus is the Messiah. And so now things have gotten to a place where they're ready to start making their way systematically to the cross. We got a lot more to talk about in this second half of the Gospel of Mark, but it's about to start heading that way. You know what? So good that it did. And so I'm so thankful tonight. Think about this. Think about how patient Jesus is with people. He's so compassionate, so caring, so loving, so truthful. And you got to think that Jesus, who had a plan then and worked that plan then, well, he's still got a plan today. You got to believe that Jesus, who had such compassion on people who were going through so much, that he would stop what he was doing, interrupt his mission to heal blindness, to heal deafness, muteness, to give legs to someone paralyzed, to clear up the skin issues with somebody who is afflicted with leprosy, to deliver somebody from even a legion of demons. What compassion Jesus has for us. And so I hope tonight that you find some encouragement with that, right? Jesus is coming full force now toward the cross to complete that mission of liberating people like me and you from the law of sin and death. And that's a pretty powerful thing. So think about that tonight as you get your rest, as you get up tomorrow, and as you go through the day. No matter what you see on television, no matter what you read on social media, no matter what people are saying and arguing about, God's got a plan. And he's going to work out that plan to perfection. And along the way, he's going to do just like he did as we've been watching all the way through the Gospels. He's going to stop when he needs to stop. He's going to help people when they need help. And he's going to be compassionate and loving all along the way. Right? Sounds like a good plan for me, actually. Maybe that I need to walk through life tomorrow and every day knowing that God's got a plan and live my life in a way that I'm going to be determined to work out the plan that God the Father has for me, just like Jesus did. But along the way, I'm going to love people. I'm going to love people like Jesus loves people. And I'm going to stop and help. I'm going to stop and pray. I'm going to stop and give hope to people and love them all along the way. Because what will change this world will be changed hearts, right? Listen, I want you to know this. I really love you. And I really appreciate the privilege you give me to be your pastor and friend. And I hope that you have a great night's sleep, great day tomorrow. And I'm looking forward to seeing you Sunday. And listen, don't forget that we do have in-person worship Sunday at 8:30 and at 10 o'clock. Live stream, Facebook Live, YouTube at 10 a.m. If you feel comfortable being with us in person, come on and give it a try. If not, join us online and pass it along to your family and friends. Hit that share button on your social media and get some more folks involved. That'd be good. We'll tell the truth. We'll put it out there. God will change hearts and lives. Listen, take care of yourself, and I look forward to seeing you soon. God bless.